Welcome back to Sports Radio 95.9 The Fan. And right now here on the Club 52 hotline, good man from the Midwest who covers Big Ten football for ESPN.com. His name is Brian Bennett, and we're going to talk about expansion, the new college football season, and some of the big teams in the Big Ten. Brian, how you doing today?
I'm doing great. Now officially covering the Big Ten and this Eastern region. Maryland Rutgers are official members today.
Yeah, you're absolutely right. Yeah, Rutgers, Maryland, I know this news came down 2 years ago, but they're officially, like you said, now in the Big Ten. How does this help the Big Ten? I mean, is just bigger map, better for recruiting? I mean, how does this actually help the conference moving forward?
Yeah, I think one thing to really keep in mind is this move really was not done just in terms to help the football portion of the conference. Now, that's different than some of the previous expansion moves we've seen throughout the country, and certainly at the Big Ten. The last two expansion additions were Nebraska and Penn State, two outstanding football programs. Maryland and Rutgers aren't quite there, but this is more about demographics, areas of the country, population shifts. You look at the Midwest. One of the real concerns for this league is the declining population in the Midwest, how so many people have moved more towards the south and the coast of the country, and now they're going to have footholds here on the East Coast to go along with Penn State. That's going to be better, they hope, for recruiting, to open up more areas for their schools to recruit, open up new markets for the league to expand into, not only for television, but also for their own alums that live in those areas to be able to come out and see their team. So it's an interesting move. It's a gamble in some ways because Maryland and Rutgers aren't big-time names that get people excited, but this is more about a long-term move for the conference and its demographics than it really is for the on-field product right now.
It's TV markets, right? I mean, come on. Who are we kidding here? Especially the Big Ten Network. Now you get to be in New York City and Washington, D.C. Is that what this was really about?
I do think that was obviously a big part of it, and the Big Ten Network now has already struck deals along the Eastern Seaboard, especially in New York and New Jersey, and those are huge. Obviously, that's going to add more money. The one thing, though, the Big Ten wasn't really hurting for money. I mean, it wasn't like the Big Ten was poor. It was already giving out more money than any conference in the country the last couple of years. So this wasn't as much, I think, about just adding more money to the coffers. So that's always important, and it certainly was a huge part of it. But I really do think a lot of it as well was about just trying to get expand the conference's reach into new population areas because you start looking at some of these trends, especially recruiting-wise, where all the players are coming from, and you can see why maybe the Big Ten has maybe struggled the last 10 years or so to really be relevant nationally. And I think there was a great fear that would continue to happen. And there was also some talk. Jim Delaney said that and we saw in the lawsuit that was filed between Maryland and the ACC that there was some talk about the ACC grabbing Penn State. So I think the Big Ten wanted to kind of protect that eastern half of its conference. So a lot of really interesting things went into it. And, again, a lot of people aren't quite sold on this move. I know fans aren't real happy to see these two teams come in. So we'll have to see how it all shakes out.
We're here with Brian Bennett, ESPN.com, the Big Ten blog. Follow him on Twitter at ESPN Big Ten. Him and Adam Rittenberg do a great job covering the Big Ten for ESPN. And, you look at the conference, we have the new college football playoff. If you look at the history of the Big Ten and the BCS, it was really Ohio State only making it to the national title game is the only one from the conference. What are your thoughts on the Big Ten moving forward with this college football playoff then?
Yeah, I think it's really, really crucial that they, get a team in that 4-team playoff as many years as they can, obviously. I think any conference that doesn't put a team in that playoff is going to become a little bit irrelevant. I mean, you really got to have 5 conferences bidding for 4 spots. And if you're that number 5 conference, your perception is going to really go down. So I think it's really important for the Big Ten to get in there. And I think what the league has done to try to get ready for that is really upgraded schedules. We see that this year. In particular, Wisconsin is opening with LSU, Michigan State going to Oregon in week 2, Ohio State, which has played some pretty weak non-conference schedules the last couple of years, playing Virginia Tech early on in the season. So I think the league is trying to really hammer that strength of schedule component home for the selection committee. Of course, it's going to really come down to whether they can win some of those games. That's been a big problem for them. I think as long as a Big Ten team, can go through the schedule, especially if it goes undefeated. But even if they can go 12-1 and win a big non-conference game, it's going to be in pretty good shape. But it's definitely a perception battle, an uphill perception battle for the league right now. And I think some of these non-conference games, especially this year and the next couple of years, are going to be huge for the league.
We're here with Brian Bennett, ESPN.com. You know what's interesting is when I look at the Big Ten title game last year in Indianapolis, where it was Michigan State, Ohio State, the two best teams in the Big Ten. Who are we kidding here? Michigan State wins late, and then they went on to go win the Rose Bowl. I feel like the best of the Big Ten, and you know me personally, I've covered the Big Ten for a couple of years. The best of the Big Ten can play defense, smash mouth football, run it, and score about 20 points a game. But I kind of feel like they need to score more points. There needs to be more offense for the Big Ten. I mean, what are your thoughts on the conference? I mean, when you're going to take on an SEC or a Pac-12 type of opponent?
Yeah, I think there's some truth to that, and I think there's been a lack of outstanding quarterback play recently in the league that has really kind of hurt the league overall, and especially some of those offensive attacks, like you're saying. I think there's been a gradual involvement, and we're starting to see some improvement there, though. I think, Ohio State, obviously under Urban Meyer, has become a very high-scoring team. We saw that shootout with Clemson in the Orange Bowl. Obviously, Ohio State didn't have enough defense to really win that game, but their offense was fine. And, you have Michigan State really starting to come on offensively throughout last year and, playing just a smash-mouth game against Stanford, who likes to play that way as well. But I do think a lot of times you match some of those teams up, especially with some Pac-12 and Big 12 teams, then they're going to have some trouble in some of those shootouts because they just don't have the kind of offenses there. But, I think they've been pretty competitive against the SEC in a lot of these bowl games. Just haven't won a lot of them. We've seen a lot of close games. Nebraska did beat Georgia last year, and Iowa played LSU pretty tough. But, again, the offense was a problem for them. So I definitely think there's something to that. But I do think it's starting to evolve a little bit. You see some of the spread attacks now coming through the Big Ten. Michigan putting up a lot of points. Northwestern, Indiana, scoring a lot of points. So it's on the rise, but I definitely do think it's been an issue the last few years.
We're here with Brian Bennett, ESPN.com. Follow him on Twitter at ESPN Big Ten. All right, let's go over some of the teams real quick. You got to start with Urban Meyer at Ohio State. Going into year 3, expectations are high. I mean, you were talking about there, scoring more points, getting better offenses. Well, I know Urban Meyer's that guy. What are the expectations there in Columbus? Like, you better get to the 14 playoff or it's a bust?
Yeah, I mean, I think after going 24-0 the last 2 regular seasons, that getting to the playoff is a reasonable expectation for fans there who kind of expect national titles every year anyway. Ohio State is really the only school in the Big Ten, the only fan base, I think, that really kind of expects to be in the national title mix every single year, and with good reason with all their resources. This, I think, is a very fascinating team this year. You've got a senior quarterback in Braxton Miller, a guy who's finished high in the Heisman voting the last 2 years, the Big Ten Offensive Player of the Year the last 2 years. So you've got a real star quarterback and a whole lot of talent that Urban Meyer has been collecting the last few years on the recruiting trail. But they're going to be very, very young in a lot of key spots. They lose 4/5 of their offensive line. They lose their top running back, their top receiver. They lose their best linebacker and cornerback is Ryan Shazier and Bradley Roby. Both went pro early. It was a defense that was really in tatters at the end of last year. A great defensive line, but there's a lot of questions at linebacker and a defensive backfield. And they brought in a new co-defensive coordinator, hiring Chris Ashway from Arkansas to kind of revamp that. So a lot of question marks, but I saw them this spring in practice, and there's just a ton of speed and ton of talent. They're going to play a lot of freshmen and sophomores, I think, and a lot of guys who are unproven. But if those guys come through and the recruiting rankings were correct, and they can find a way to harness all that speed and talent, this could be a very, very good team, and I think the schedule is pretty favorable for them as well.
Brian, what about their biggest rival, Michigan? I mean, Brady Hoke's been there for a couple of years, and he's trying to get over the Rich Rodriguez era. What's going on with Michigan? Are they on the up, or are they going on the downtrend? I mean, what are your thoughts on the Wolverines?
Yeah, I think you could definitely say they've been trending down a little bit the last couple of years. Going from the Sugar Bowl win his first year there to 8-5 to 7-5 in the regular season last year with some really, really ugly games they play. It's just been an interesting situation there where I think he came in and they were able to kind of maximize the talents of some players left over from the Rich Rod era. And now they've been trying to kind of rebuild, especially on the offensive line, which is a disaster last year. And it is still going to be really young and unproven this year. And just I think they haven't really found the right identity on offense. And they're going to try to change that this year with Doug Nussmeier, who came over from Alabama, and the new offensive coordinator, going to really try to play that pro-style, smash-mouth running game that Brady Hoke really favors, but they haven't really incorporated the last couple of years. I still have a lot of doubts about them. They've recruited very well, at least according to the national recruiting rankings, but a lot of those players just haven't developed into the kind of stars that we expected from them yet. And of course, a lot of them are still young. Some of them are just third-year juniors and that sort of thing at this point. They've got a big-time recruit coming in Jabril Peppers, who could be, starting cornerback from day one. So it's a really interesting team. I don't think they're going to be much better than probably third in the East Division this year. I just think they're in a stacked division, and they've got a lot of question marks. But our team, I think it's a huge year for Brady Hoke. I think if they go 7-5 again, I think you could be seeing him either being on the hot seat next year or even getting some calls for him for there to be a change this year.
Yeah, it's a good point. We're here with Brian Bennett, ESPN.com. You brought up the divisions right there. I've been wanting to ask you that. It was legends and leaders for the first 2 years. Now we got East-West. I'm going to put you on the spot. Okay, who's in the East? Who's in the West, my friend?
Well, it's pretty easy to figure out. You can just draw a line right down pretty much the state of Indiana and go East-West, and that's who's in it. Obviously, Maryland and Rutgers going in the East with Penn State, Ohio State, Michigan, and Indiana. And then in the West, you got Purdue and all the Western schools like Nebraska, Minnesota, Iowa, Wisconsin, Northwestern. I probably forgot one there, but there's 14 schools. But yeah, it's really easy to remember. I don't think anybody can remember who was in Legends and Leaders.
No.
The first couple of years. So this is pretty easy to remember. It's almost basically a time zone split. So I like it a lot. And in terms of that, I do think the East is a little top heavy, especially with Michigan State's recent emergence as a power. I think that makes it pretty top heavy with Michigan State, Ohio State, and Penn State. Of course, Michigan has to prove they're still a power, and Penn State has to come off their probation strong. But if all four of those programs are clicking, I think it's a little stronger than the West. But I do think the West, probably top to bottom, is a lot. There's a lot more parity over there. You got Nebraska and Wisconsin who've been very good. Then you got a lot of teams like Iowa, Northwestern, Minnesota, who've been pretty good, but not really nationally elite. But it could be a wide open division this year. So it's going to be pretty fun to watch this year, I think.
Yeah, if you're Wisconsin or Nebraska, didn't you hit the jackpot here where it's like we're taking on Purdue and Northwestern? It's better than Michigan State and Penn State, right? And Michigan, Ohio State. I mean, they hit the jackpot, right?
Well, and this year, Wisconsin and Iowa, they don't play Ohio State or Michigan State from the other side.
Oh.
I don't think they play Michigan either. So, I mean, they've got a great schedule. If they can win their non-conference games and beat the teams in their own side, I mean, they could be undefeated or only have one loss going in the Big Ten championship game. So they'd have a chance to really be in a position to make the playoff without really having to play a lot of those powers on the other side. So I definitely think, in terms of trying to avoid some of those big teams, that is a win. But I think there's also some concern from those teams that they're not going to get as much exposure in the East, which is a big reason for this whole expansion. And I think a lot of their fans, particularly Nebraska fans, are not real happy that they're not going to be seeing Ohio State, Michigan, Penn State on the schedule every year. That's kind of why they got in the Big Ten. They didn't get in the Big Ten to play Iowa and Minnesota every year. They would just stay in the Big 12 and played Texas and Oklahoma. So there's some pluses and minuses definitely to both.
Can we, and I'll end with this, and I appreciate your time. We're with Brian Bennett, ESPN.com, covering the Big Ten. Can we get the Big Ten title game at Soldier Field or Lambeau Field in early December? Can we I'm sick of Indianapolis. Let's get it outside in the snow the way it should be in the Big Ten.
Hey, I'm with you. I've been kind of stumping for that as well. I'd love to see it outside. I would love to see it in the snow. I will say this: Indianapolis has been a great host. If you've ever been there, it's a great place to have a big time sporting event because everything's so walkable downtown. You got all the bars and restaurants and the stadium's right there, and it's a great stadium, and of course it's indoors, so all the hotels are right down there. So it's a little more convenient. It's certainly a lot more convenient for fans than Lambeau Field would be, although Lambeau Field would be awesome. Mm-hmm. Chicago makes just so much sense, though, because it's basically Chicago is the center of Big Ten country. It's where all the most Big Ten fans are. There's still some concerns about the Soldier Field playing surface is not very good, and who knows how torn up that would be, in December, and who knows what the weather would be, but yeah, I agree with that. I don't think it should be there every year, but I would certainly like to see it rotate and every now and then and be in Chicago and just see that on TV with the snow, and it'd just be fantastic.
Brian Bennett, ESPN.com. Brian, appreciate the time talking Big Ten football, and I hope I can get you on again.
Anytime. I appreciate it.